Actually, you do about this time of year. We usually wait for the appointments to happen, so you may end up having to do it again. But we do need 2 people to sign documents, so we really do need a president and a secretary, and actually a vice president too. So I mean, really, we need three positions filled here right now.
Yep. Okay. So, with that, I guess if there are any nominations or volunteers to take on the position of chairperson. If not, I would like to make a nomination of Christine Thompson as our chairperson for the new year.
I would second that.
Any further discussions? I appreciate Chris has, I spoke to her briefly, and with the position that we're in with the vacancies, and my position hasn't been appointed at this point. So she has graciously accepted, if I can put that in your words in your mouth.
That's fine. Yes.
All right. Okay.
I assume responsibility.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. With that, then, I believe it would be, now, Chris would be in position to lead the remainder of the meeting. And just for clarification here, we have researched the city location for our typical meetings, and there was I guess, conflict for today, so that's why we had our meeting again here today. So I don't know if, Bill, if you want to explain further or not.
Yeah, and then the next conflict is in August, if we even have a meeting that, that's a summer month, so sometimes we skip some of the summer month meetings, but the next conflict would be that first Tuesday in August. Other than that, I think the plan right now is to have all the meetings at City Hall, but that's up to the commission to decide.
Okay. All right. Okay. With that, I'll turn it over to our chairperson.
All right. If I can figure out where the microphone is. There we go. I guess the first thing is to approve the agenda.
Here, let's do the vice chair and the secretary.
Oh, okay.
Yep, so go ahead.
Go ahead, yeah. All right. We need a vice chairperson and a secretary, and any nominations or volunteers?
Since I'm existing secretary, I would nominate Mary Daly as our vice chair.
I would second that. Okay.
Okay.
Do we need to vote?
Aye.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, great.
Now,
Moving on then.
Secretary? Do we need to renominate secretary, or do I?
I don't think you need to, as long as it's
Okay.
filled, so I think we're good.
Okay. Now we can move on to approving the agenda, and I understand that there's
Consent agenda
the consent agenda?
would be changed.
Yes. And what
Okay.
items would you like taken off, John?
I would like to further discuss line item 10 and 11.
Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda, removing items 10 and 11.
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Moving on then to customers to be heard and recognitions.
The only recognition I have is there's some guests we have in the audience, and I'd like to recognize Sherry Larson of Moorhead Business Association. And we recently sponsored the annual meeting, and Sherry wanted to come to this meeting and show a presence, and I thought maybe you could just tell us a little bit about Moorhead Business Association and make sure and put your mic on there.
Again, my name is Sherry Larson, and I am the Executive Director for the Moorhead Business Association. And this evening we have Pat Kovash, as well as Amber Solon, who are on our board. We are celebrating our 10th anniversary this year, and so we're very excited, and our membership continues to grow. We're out there to network, inform, as well as advocate for the Moorhead businesses. And we're excited for this week. We are having our board retreat. So we're going to be all revved up with a brand new mission, hope, and a vision for 2020. And I thank you very much for supporting us at the MBA annual banquet. This year we held it in November. In the past it's been in April, and it was a very fun evening. We had wonderful speakers such as Mr. Cole with the Moorhead High. He was our speaker and keynote speaker, and then also our MC, which was Patrick Kirby, brought a lot of zest to the meeting. So we thank you again for your major sponsorship.
You bet.
Any
Thank
questions?
Yeah, and I think the other thing we talked about too was getting appointments to the commission. So business association can beat the bushes a bit for people that may want to volunteer for appointment to the commission.
Yes.
So
Thank you for that reminder.
yeah, no.
Thank you. Any comments?
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody here that wishes to address the commission? Any speakers? Customers to be heard? Recognitions. I don't know if this is appropriate, but I'd like to recognize the service of that Ralph has given us. It's unfortunate that he can't be here tonight so that he can be recognized in person, but I think he served the council well, or the commission well, excuse me, and he'll be sorely missed.
Yes, he will. It's like a moment of silence, but yeah,
Yeah,
yes, he
right.
will. We will.
Chris, can I just add to that?
Sure.
I mentioned that to Chris. I wanted to, as our Ward 3 council member, I just wanted to say that too, that, I don't think people always realize all the hard work from citizens on our boards and commissions, and Rolf was on this commission for a number of years, and he served so admirably, and it's just an honor to have him representing Ward 3.
Chris?
Sure.
I would just like to add here, as far as I think we know, Rolf's was very commitment for infrastructure, and he was champion for us replacing our old water lines, and I would hope that would be continued as a priority for the commission here. And he was also our sludge master, so I don't know if we can name a pond after him or the plant after him, but it might be comical if nothing else.
We have to pronounce his last name, which. Oh, great. Moving on to old business. Is there any old business to take care of today? Seeing none, we'll move on to reports. First up is City Council. Chuck?
I guess that'll be me. It's nice to be back. So, really not too much going on with City Council. We've been off since early December. We did have a workshop yesterday, and we kind of finalized our legislative actions. Number one being the transfer station for the solid waste, which I'm a champion of. And I like my name on that building because nothing says solid waste like Chuck Hendrickson. So. And then we talked about the 11th Street underpass too, and just finalized some goals for a legislative session. We talked a little bit about upcoming flood in the spring, which we're pretty sure it's going to flood. So I'm just getting our ducks in order there. And excuse me. And then we had the Public Works Department talk about our road situation. Hopefully we can work with MPS when we start doing those roads, work closely with MPS just to make sure things get done adequately and get everything done timely. So, but other than that, yeah, we've been off, but it's nice to be back. It's nice to see a lot of familiar faces. So thanks. I don't know, Deb, do you have anything?
Okay. Public Service Commission? John?
Yes, maybe for the council reps here, can you give us an update on the status for the appointments for the commission? Because as you see right now, we're down to 3, and that's the required quorum amount. And I'm going to be gone for some time here in the near future, so if you can just give us a status, or if there's a way we can find people or assist in finding people or whatever the case may be to assist in this process.
And Deb, if you want to add, that's fine too, Councilmember White. It came up pretty quick, so we're kind of under the gun right now. So we're like with Ward 4 with Dave Anderson. I thought did an admirable job for Ward 4 and a lot of service. I don't know if you recognized him at the last meeting, but I thought he did a really good job. For more public service, it's kind of a different appointment. You have to. It's more involved. So we're looking through the applications right now to see who we can appoint. So, and I'm sure Third Ward is going through the same process. So. Right now, we'll make them as quick as we can, but it's, and I know we're under the gun, but it's going to take a little time. So, when are you gone? Are you in Florida?
Yeah. So it's basically nothing, no date it's committed to. So that's what Bill and I were just discussing here in meetings and the importance of some meetings here, and if I am not here, how we can accommodate a quorum.
Right.
So we've been in discussions how we can still facilitate that need be.
I mean, we know we're and third or second ward. I don't know about second ward, but yeah, I know it came upon us quick. So we're working hard to fill those appointments. So we'll let you know. And we haven't had a council meeting too. So our first one's this coming Monday. So
And
For
go ahead.
Ward 3, we met already, so it's, each council member, the pairs work together on it, and we review the application. And tomorrow's the deadline for putting in the names for next Mondays, and so we plan to have ours on for Monday.
And I met with my council cohort too, and we're still discussing it. So.
And we have been kind of beating the bushes, like I said, with the Moorhead Business Association. Hopefully you've got some names, maybe from those. At Rotary today, Rotary Club meeting, I did make an announcement there as well for people in the 3rd and 4th Ward that are interested to get those applications in. Sounds like yours has to be in quickly, right? Because you've got an appointment coming for next Monday?
Yeah.
So, yeah, you may even get a couple calls today or tomorrow or whatever. So, but yeah, we just put it out there so that people know that, volunteering is good.
Absolutely.
So
that's a good reminder, just at all times, so people don't have to wait until there's an opening. If they're ever interested, they can always put it on. We keep those on file, and that way, when a vacancy happens, we don't have to make you wait. We can move as quickly as possible.
And I think,
Yeah.
I don't know how long they keep the applications. I don't know if it's do you remember, Mary?
I think it's a year.
A year, then you have to reapply. So if it's over a year, I'd probably reapply with your application of what boards you want to serve on. So.
Thank you for that reminder. Report, Bill.
let's see. Speaking of volunteer opportunities, we do have a volunteer opportunity since Dave Anderson is now no longer on the commission for the Water Tower Art Committee. Christine Thompson is one of the volunteers, and the city council is looking for one other commissioner if possible. Since we're down to 3, if we have to wait maybe until someone else joins us, that may be what we want to do. But I think they have a meeting this Thursday that they'd like to have someone there. So I hope, Chris, you're available for that meeting. Thursday, no?
No, I had something else. I had
Okay.
something that trumped it come up.
Yeah.
So
Chris Knutson will be there. But
Great.
if anyone wants to volunteer for that, that's for the Water Tower Art, but I can understand if you can't make it to that. What time's that meeting on Thursday?
5.
5 o'clock? So we may end up having to just wait. I don't see anybody jump into the,
I can try it again, but as a representative of the
commission. Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be a long-term commitment. It could just be one meeting, and then you could pass the baton, so to speak, if you felt inclined.
Why don't we visit here, give you some times.
Yeah.
Because you had to turn on your mics too. Sorry. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Okay. Bill, any reports?
Nope, that's all I had. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Now, and then the order here, you may want to, this item, well, I guess it'll be about a half hour long, and then we've got a couple other items after that, so.
Okay, so the report on strategic direction for future water supply, who's speaking to that?
Chris is.
Chris is?
Thank you, MBA folks.
I'll go ahead and kind of dive right in. The intent of this presentation is really to just provide a brief refresher and update with respect to water supply. It's just a nice complement to item 9D, which is in your packet. I'll kind of just dive right in. It's certainly not an all-encompassing presentation, but really just kind of more meant as an update and refresher with respect to our effort.
And if I could interrupt you right
Absolutely.
away, Chuck talked about the legislative priorities that the council looked at. This is a legislative priority in the future that we would be requesting the council to put on their list. Because as Chris is going to explain, we've got about $25 million worth of cost that's coming up over the next few years that really should be perfect for a legislative grant or something like that from the state. So.
Absolutely. So I'll just talk a little bit about kind of where our water comes from, some of our efforts in terms of long-term water supply, and then really kind of the focus of the presentation will be just some updates with respect to the Red River Valley Water Supply Project, and then the Buffalo Aquifer expansion, which Bill alluded to in terms of our funding request. And we talked about potentially using maybe some state legislature money at our last meeting in December. So it's kind of a supplement to that discussion. Just a brief overview of our treatment process before we dive into the water supply. We've talked a lot about sludge over the past few years, but we'll just kind of start with the sludge producing process, the softening basins. So basically we take river aquifer water, soften that water, then we treat it with ozone, and then we filter it with anthracite sand filters. Finally, we chloraminate that water and send it to our reservoirs and out to our system. Just a brief overview of our treatment process, but really today we'll be talking about the river and aquifer water that we use to supply our treatment process. So what does our allocation look like in terms of source water utilization? We primarily use the Red River as our water source, so from 2006 to 2015, this is our allocation percentage. We use about 80% of our water comes from the Red River. The remaining 20 or so percent comes from both the Buffalo and Moorhead aquifers. And this is a good reminder that really, when we'll talk a lot about today, is that the Buffalo aquifer, we've really tried to preserve that resource as a drought supplement. So this is what a utilization pattern looks like for some wet years, 2006, 2015. If we're in a drought situation, that allocation would change significantly. So that's just a brief overview of kind of what we've used over the past years, and we'll talk a little bit about what a drought situation might look like. In terms of the geography of where our aquifer, where the Buffalo aquifer is located, where the water treatment plant is located, and the Red River intake. So we're a little unique in terms of the Moorhead water treatment plant location with respect to the water sources. I'll talk first about the Red River intake. It's located about 14th Avenue South along the riverbank there. Back in 2012, we did a project to update that infrastructure associated with that site. And then our Buffalo wells are located on the Buffalo aquifer, and the white line there is the Highway 10 336 interchange. You can see the road going there. The North Buffalo well is located several miles north of our South Buffalo wells, but we'll see some other maps of the Buffalo aquifer as well, but the Buffalo aquifer runs about 30 miles north-south. The North Buffalo wells are on the very northern tip of the aquifer, and the South Buffalo wells are on the northern edge, but not the tip of the aquifer. So kind of one of the interesting things that's happened over the past several years, this is kind of a refresher in terms of what our, a little bit more detail in terms of what our utilization looks like. So I'll kind of, I don't have a laser pointer, but I'll just have to kind of follow along, follow the mouse cursor here. I'll talk first about this kind of top graph. There's a lot going on, so just bear with me, I guess. This is our total withdrawal from respective water sources. So this black line is actually the total withdrawal. This is the river withdrawal right here, this blue line. And then this dashed line is the groundwater withdrawal. A couple things to note. With respect to our total withdrawal, it's really stable from 1995 to pretty much present. Why is that? Even though Moorhead has grown significantly, we've seen a lot of water conservation since that time. So our withdrawals have been fairly stable at about 1.5 billion gallons per year. So that's this axis over here is in million gallons per year. We're about 1.5 billion gallons of total water usage per year. The other thing to note is with respect to the river and aquifer usage, you see this divergence here in 1995. This is the construction of the new water treatment plant. And what you'll see is the usage of the river escalated quickly, and so we use much more river water than previous to that time period as a result of the construction of the new plant. Why is that? It's just as a result of the treatment plant that we have is really optimized for treating river water. And one of the interesting things in the last several years is that we've actually increased our groundwater utilization for a couple reasons. And we'll dig into these couple little peaks here. This first peak was as a result of our Red River intake upgrade project. And then this next peak, these peaks are indicated by arrows down here, is as a result of the 2021st Street upgrade project, and then also some relative declines in Red River water quality over the last several years. So we've had some really deteriorating water quality on the Red River, and that's actually caused us to increase our utilization on the aquifer water. So the bottom graph here is just a graph showing the combined usage of well water. These are respective well fields down here, but the real key is that over the past several years, we've actually had to increase our well water utilization as a result of deteriorating water quality within the Red River. And feel free to stop me at any time. There's a lot of stuff going on here. But yeah.
You hear me?
Yeah.
What's causing deterioration? Is it the runoff from farmland, or?
It's the deterioration I'm referring to is actually total hardness. So the Lake Traverse and some of the upstream dischargers, we're seeing more total hardness in the water and more dissolved solids. So that's it's actually much more costly to treat that water because there's more hardness in it. So we have to feed more chemical to hit our water quality set points. So it's a result of those upstream discharges, and we've been in contact. Certainly, other folks along the Red River, City of Fargo, have noticed this as well. It's increased their costs substantially as well because they don't have the ability to switch to an aquifer water source. They use the Cheyenne.
Right.
Regardless, the point is the water's become more costly to treat on the Red River, so we've had to increase our utilization of aquifer water.
So is it natural, or is it human, or is it a little mix of both? The water's becoming harder?
It's a result of, it's hard to pinpoint the cause of it, but certainly the fact that it's been so wet the last couple of years, that's been a big piece of it. But there's been a lot of changes in terms of, a lot of drain tiles been put in the Southern Valley. There's been a lot of other things, but it's tough to pinpoint the exact cause. But there's been a lot of changes, and it's been very wet.
Okay.
So,
Sure. Thanks.
and then the next slide is actually just to kind of highlight the increasing trend in well water utilization. So those two kind of peak years, 2012, and then the last several years, more utilization as a result of that Red River water degradation. So the trend is definitely up. And it's something we need to be kind of cognizant of in terms of the impact of on the aquifer itself. This is just a slide to kind of show what happens to an aquifer when you pump it. So many people are familiar with the term kind of water table. So this blue is the water table, and the aquifer actually has this shape. Our well goes down about 110 feet, and you hit water probably 20, 30 feet down, and then we pump it. So the water, you're actually looking into the aquifer here. So you're underground, you're looking into the aquifer, and you see water flowing this direction through the aquifer, basically going from the Buffalo River. The water flows from the Buffalo River through the aquifer to the Red River. So this is a non-pumping condition. The water table is kind of happy up here, 20, 30 feet below ground. Then when we start pumping, the water table actually, you see this kind of cone of depression in the aquifer. So we reduce that water table, and we pump water. And you can see the flow pattern from basically Buffalo River to the Red River. More water is being put into the aquifer. Over time, what can happen, you can actually lower the water table in the area. So what we'll see on the next slide is kind of some graphs on what the water table level is. How far below ground is that water table going as a result of pumping or not pumping the aquifer? So we're looking at really trying to assess how much water is in the aquifer and making sure that the utilization pattern that we have on the aquifer is sustainable. So this is a really interesting slide. A couple things to note. First, we'll start off with the shape of the aquifer itself. So about 30 miles north-south. This gives you kind of an overview of the aquifer shape. But we have an interesting monitoring well that's located near our southern well field, and this has a long history in terms of the wells were actually drilled in the late 50s. That's when the pipeline connecting the South Buffalo well field was put in between the South Buffalo well field and the water treatment plant. So, there's a monitoring well that's been looking at groundwater levels out there for quite some time. And what we see is, very kind of, the water table was reduced, but, relatively stable utilization from basically 1950 to about 1995. 1995, the water level in the aquifer actually increases significantly. Again, you'll remember in that first graph, that's when our water utilization on the aquifer started decreasing. So we really reduced the withdrawals on the Buffalo aquifer, and then the levels started to go up. So this black line is a moving average of that respective data. So up until the last several years, the water level was increasing to a pretty high level. So that water, basically the aquifer is filling up to about 20 feet below ground. Over the last several years, just with the increased withdrawal, we're actually seeing some reduction in terms of aquifer levels. So we're pumping actually, you saw the shape of the aquifer has this kind of shape. We're actually kind of pumping the top of it. We're reducing that water table, almost pumping the top of it down a little bit. And that's just a result of that increased utilization over the past several years. You can see it's starting to kind of rise again. So we notice this trend, and we're trying to alter our allocation between well fields just to make sure that the utilization pattern is stable, and we want to make sure that the slope doesn't decrease too much on that particular monitoring well.
Can I just, along those, during that same time, we were also in a wet cycle too. So
That's
if
right.
we had happened to have been in a dry cycle, we would have seen a more precipitous decline. And so I'm sure is that part of thinking ahead of when we'll eventually move out of this wet cycle into a dry cycle?
Right. So one way to think of it too is that all the water that we save during this period is water that we would utilize during a drought situation where recharge back in the aquifer is significantly limited. So, yeah, very good point. So in terms of, and this kind of leads nicely into the next conversation about long-term water supply planning and what are our targets for water supply planning, what do we think about? When we started developing the Buffalo Aquifer Management Plan, really we were targeting a 1930s-style drought, and that's really what the focus for long-term water supply planning for this region has been, basically a 10-year drought where very little precipitation, and you basically kind of need all the water resources you can get. That's what we've kind of focused on as a planning effort. So we can see since 1995, these blue lines indicate relatively wet years. So we've been in a relatively wet cycle. But as we've seen in the past, wet cycle can lead to a dry cycle very quickly. So in the mid-'80s, appeared pretty wet here. All of a sudden it snapped down, and we're all of a sudden in a somewhat mild drought condition. But I believe the Red River was limited during this time period. So Red River has seen periods of little to no flow. 1930s, very little to no flow. These periods, I believe, were little to no flow as well. So looking at our future water supply options and what we're kind of thinking about in terms of water supply, we'll talk about the two projects that are really relevant to our region and kind of what we're planning for in terms of shortfalls. For 2040, based on our current groundwater capacity of 5.5 million, that's what we can pump out of the aquifer today. We'd be about 0.77 short of an average day. For example, just imagine the Red River goes away on an average day in 2040, we'd be about 0.8 million gallons short of our average day flow. On a max day flow for 2040, we'd be about 4 million gallons short or so. So starting to think into the future, 2040 seems like a long time away, but we're starting to look at planning and developing this project to make sure that we have water supply in place if we are limited by a drought situation. So the two options that the Commission has looked at for quite some time, the Red River Valley Water Supply Project and then the Buffalo Aquifer expansion. We'll talk probably more a little bit about the Buffalo Aquifer expansion, but Commissioner, we've been still involved in monitoring the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. It's a very important project for the region, so we just wanted to provide an update with respect to that project. Commissioner Ralph Maynard-Meelan was on the board of that project and was very involved in monitoring that project as well. So just to provide we just wanted to provide a brief update with respect to those two projects. Just kind of a refresher on kind of what the Red River Valley Water Supply Project looks like. This particular figure is a few years old, but it really kind of conveys the message of what the project is. Basically, they're looking at taking water from the Missouri River, pumping that water to some type of biota water treatment plant. There'd be a break tank in this midsection of the pipeline. They'd pump that water all the way to the Cheyenne River where it would be discharged. And they're looking. There's a couple developing pieces, but if I was going to say the take home of what's going on in the project, they're looking at some early out construction with respect to the project to preserve some of the permitting status for the project. That's what's going on. So there's been some funding for the project recently, from 2017 to 2019. A lot of design work has been done, and from 2019 to 2021, it's likely that some components of the project will be constructed. And again, the intent is to use Missouri River water to supply the Red River Valley, significantly Fargo and Grand Forks with a supplemental water source. We'll go through the timeline a little bit, but in we opted out of the project of several years ago, but the project is still continued to move forward. The projected flow for the pipeline is about 165 cubic feet of water per second, which is about 74,000 gallons per minute. So massive amount of water to be transported with this project. And the most recent estimate is on the low end probably 1.1 billion, but on the high end probably 1.7, between 1.5 to 1.7, somewhere in there on the high side for the project.
Got a quick question.
Yeah.
So, if this project is completed, I mean, when would it be initiated? I mean, when would it be full time, taking water from the Cheyenne? I mean, what's the level it has to get at before?
So the owners of the pipeline would indicate basically they'd have to maintain some low flow, maintenance flow in the pipeline, and basically what would happen is a few of the owners would say, "Hey, we need water to soon," and then the pipeline would turn on to fill up Lake Ashtabula and make sure that they had the available water they need.
Okay, and does it affect any border rivers, Red River?
It'll put more flow into the Red River. Yeah.
Yeah, because you have tributary.
Yep.
Okay. But
So
when-
that's where they'll get their water from, Grand Forks and
Red River.
yeah.
But it does affect Minnesota too. But you said we bought out of it. When was that?
We'll get it. We'll see it kind of on the next
Okay.
slide. It's kind of a nice overview.
Okay.
We'll go through that.
All right, thanks.
So yeah, just kind of a refresh on the project. Back in 2001 is when it originated, and originally the project was envisioned as a federally subsidized project. One of the key points is in 2008, it really kind of stalled out as a federal project because the project was sponsored by Bureau of Reclamation. They couldn't get what's called a record of decision, which is an important environmental milestone. They just weren't able to achieve that. So in 2012, I would say the project was kind of reimagined as a state and locally funded project, whereby the state of North Dakota would sponsor some percentage of the project, and local users would sponsor the rest of it. So a lot of design work really happened from 2012 to 2014, and then 2016, basically the project was looking for firm commitments and nominations with respect to the project. That's when we elected to pursue the Buffalo Aquifer as our main future water supply. So we would have had some significant financial contributions at that point if we elected to stay within the project. In 2017, that's when a lot of the design work really kind of reinitiated for the project. And then 18 and 19 here, we're really on the precipice of early construction for the project. So they're looking at constructing some of the pipeline segments for the project, and then some components with the intake and discharge. And those portions, the intent of those portions of construction are really to preserve the permitting status of the project. So, oh yeah, go ahead.
Maybe just get in a little more detail around the decision why Board of Public Service decided to pursue the Buffalo versus continuing with the project as far as the limitations and the cost compared to what the Buffalo Water would do.
Sure. I could provide some more detail. At that point, they would have required, it would have required at least $50,000, if not more, $1,000 to stay within the project, and we would have had some ongoing contributions in terms of making sure that the design continues for the project, and we'd have some commitments along the way. So it was at that time when some of those big commitments came up. I don't remember the exact dollar amounts, but that was really, from my standpoint, the intent of.
Well, just from my memory here, for the council people, is that this project would only come to Fargo, so then there would have to be an expense absorbed to move it from Fargo to Moorhead. And the water that you're using at that time would create a significant cost to the water treatment plant. Were a couple of them, and the ongoing maintenance of the water pipeline would be a huge expense as well here. So, and then the initial expense, they didn't know what the contributor's portion would be, and let alone all the hurdles that they're going to encounter through the litigation and water use and those sort of things. So with all those factors involved and comparing what our option was available, that was just a real quick summary of the rationale that was used to move to a different option.
Yeah, I mean, and we do have a very detailed agenda item report from a few years ago when we made the decision. And we were anteing up, on an annual basis, several thousands of dollars, basically just to stay in the game. And then, like Chris mentioned, they were looking for a significant increase, like, I'm thinking it was 10 times as much, 50,000, 100,000. And at that time we said, okay, we got to take a closer look at this. And from our standpoint, we've got a very good resource just to the east of us that can supply us with through a 10-year drought at much less cost than the tens of millions of dollars we'd have to bond for and pay for if we're participating with the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. And when you went through the report, it became very obvious that it's such a huge number. and there's a lot of unknowns, that we just said, for now, we'll kind of keep watch on this, but we're not making any commitment. And they were, gracious to allow Ralph Maynard Meehan to be on their board for a number of years since that time, and he has participated and kept us informed of kind of how they're doing, even though we haven't been anteing up anymore. And I mean, right now we're still kind of in a holding pattern, watching them. I would be surprised if they didn't come back and say, Moorhead, we really need you in order to do this project. That's where it's going to get a little difficult, for the commission and the council to again say, it's going to be a 100% increase in our water rates, and we just can't afford that. And that's really what you're looking at, doubling of our water rates type of increases.
From an initial, or I believe we did a significant cost analysis at that time before the decision was made. I believe the 40-year cost was around $40 million, and there's a lot of assumptions built in. One of the big components of the project is, I mentioned that originally it was envisioned as a federal project. That federal project assumed a 90% federal government cost share to a 10% local cost share. So that 90-10 allocation was kind of carried forward by the state up until recently, where the allocation has shifted from 90-10 to 75-25. And so at a 75-25, basically where 75% of the cost is borne by the state, 25% by local users, our cost would go up even from a $40 million 40-year life cycle cost. So like I mentioned, I didn't include all the financial details in this report. It's kind of meant as an update, but we did some significant analysis at that time. Kind of circling back to just a little bit more about kind of shifting gears to the Buffalo Aquifer expansion. So just broadly, how much water is in the aquifer, and kind of how do we know some of the details, or how do we know that the resource would be sustainable in terms of a drought condition? Basically, the aquifer has about 200 billion gallons, but only about 10 to 20% of that water could be withdrawn. And in 2015, we did a significant modeling effort with a groundwater modeling company, and the kind of output of that report was the development of the Buffalo Aquifer Management Plan. But the real salient pieces from the modeling effort were that pumping 5 million gallons from the current well fields would withdraw the water levels to points that we couldn't pump anymore within 6 years in a worst case drought, i.e. no recharge to the aquifer, no precipitation, kind of a catastrophic level drought. If we add the new add the new wells proposed to be to the south of our existing well field, we could sustain about 6.5 million gallons per year of utilization for about 10 years. So the output of it is that if we build that infrastructure, we can obtain the water that we would need to meet our requirements. That's really the main take-home message. So, sorry, just before I go to the next slide, but I kind of mentioned that our existing well fields are here. The future well fields would be south of those existing well fields, so it would be somewhere in here. And we've looked at some initial pipe alignments. I won't get into the pipe alignments and the cost in terrible detail tonight, but that's essentially kind of where our well field would be, is south of our existing wells. So in terms of our expansion timeline, Bill mentioned that the cost is really one of the big items for this project, and that's really something that we're starting to take a look at in terms of planning. We have this kind of tentatively budgeted for 2023, and we're starting to really kind of evaluate some of the preliminary engineering components, but also some of the funding components of the project. In the last report that we did in December, I talked about how the $25 million total project cost could be kind of broken up into two segments, i.e. $12.5 million for first phase of the project and $12.5 million for the second phase. So kind of where are we at? This is a timeline that we developed a few years back in terms of what the project could look like on a 6-year basis. We're actually kind of right in this. We finished the Buffalo Aquifer Management Plan 16. We're kind of right here in this preliminary engineering report and test wells. The next phase, we had originally targeted the Drinking Water Revolving Fund as a potential funding source, but there's a number of options, including possibly state bonding money. And then we would shift to design, construction, and finish the project. So design to finishing the project is about a 3-year project. With that, I just, again, wanted to provide an overview with respect to our water supply planning, and there shouldn't be more items with respect to this topic, but just wanted to kind of provide a brief refresher.
Any questions for Chris?
With Ralph not being on the commission any longer, can we or will we look at having somebody else attend those meetings, either through the commission or the council?
Yeah, I'm the alternate delegate to the board right now, so I can serve in that capacity until another person is appointed. It would be good to appoint somebody soon to that post, and but I attend the meetings regardless. But yeah, it would be good to appoint somebody.
And they generally meet in Fargo, and they generally meet monthly?
Monthly, usually Friday morning at about 11 o'clock. So we can bring back another item, or the commission could appoint really at any time, I would say.
Okay. I've made a note, so we'll revisit this when we get a full complement of commissioners. I think we need a motion to accept the report. All in favor? Thank you. Item number 10.
Item number 10 is the approval of the electric service territory agreement with Red River Valley Cooperative Power Association for the storage units in South Moorhead, excuse me. And this item is generally the result of a negotiation as the city of Moorhead expands its city limits. So generally, we don't have one of these come up until there's an annexation that's occurred. They're in the Stormore situation where there's some storage units south Moorhead. There was the developer there that wanted to locate these storage units in South Moorhead. They needed electric service. If the storage units are annexed, then we generally, well, by policy, by Moorhead Public Service Commission policy, we will provide electric service. When we do that, state law requires us to negotiate with the electric cooperative. This annexation is going to occur next year. I mean, it's taken some time. They've actually built the storage units, and they have temporary electric power from Moorhead Public Service. But Travis has been negotiating with Red River Valley Cooperative and done a nice job. It's been back to the commission a number of times, and we work also with Caleb Brennan, our legal counsel out of the Twin Cities, to put together the service territory buyout agreement, and that's attached. The commission wanted to make sure that since we were going above 30 mils per kilowatt hour, which is really higher than what we've gone in the past, they wanted to make sure that there was language in the agreement that noted that this was for developed property, and that's why we would pay a bit more for the buyout. The 31.3 mils per kilowatt hour is the same as 3.13 cents per kilowatt hour, and we pay that over a 10-year period of time when the permanent meter is installed. That's when it starts. So that's all outlined in the agreement. It's it's pretty routine other than the 31.3. We unfortunately broke that barrier of 30, but we've got it for developed property, and it's not that large of an annexation, so it's not probably worth it to argue too much more about how much we're going to pay and just get this done. So it's really ready for your action tonight. The cooperative board has approved it, and we met with their new CEO, Rich Whitcomb, right out here in the hallway last Friday, and I think they're very satisfied with what's occurred, and hopefully this will be, good working relation moving forward. The only other thing to note maybe is when the city does do an annexation, it does force us into negotiating the service territory rights. Always seems to be a difficult thing, so the city should make sure and be working with us and tell us when an annexation is coming so that we can work together with Red River Valley Cooperative to make sure they're understanding that it's necessary and all that.
John?
Again, the reason I wanted to have further discussion is that this, in the future, people could come to us and say, well, you paid 31 to the previous property, that's what you're going to pay us for this one. But in the documentation here, and there was significant discussion that we had the concession due to it being a developed property. And that's where I wanted to really stress the clarification, because if we are perceived to be setting precedents of what we're going to be paying in the future, that would, in a larger project, that could cost us a significant amount of money. So Bill did review the documentation and verified that it is noted in documents that it is developed property. And again, I thought it would be just good for a point of record that we noted as well that the reason why the exception rate was paid.
And it would be good to note that in the minutes as well. So,
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
You mentioned the communication with the city. So as a newbie, if you could just walk us through what's the current process for communicating about that, and are there things that we could or should be doing differently so when there's a discussion start?
This was an unusual one because the county really didn't want it to, or maybe the county did want it to occur and the city didn't want it to occur. It ended up being messy, so we saw it in the papers like everybody else. So this one, we were aware of it. The cooperative was aware of it. But there's been annexations in the past where we've annexed a large swath of South Moorhead, and we haven't been that aware of it. Because developers are if things are growing fast, developers probably don't communicate as well as what we would like them to do or the cooperative would like them to do. So sometimes it can be a surprise. So as best we can, our staff and I watch the development plans of the city and all their planning documents. So we're involved in those. So that should be okay. But when the developers come in and say, I want to do this, as much notice as we can get is good. Mm-hmm. But sometimes the city doesn't have a lot of control over that as well. We get criticized by the cooperatives all over the state if we surprise them with a development. They like to be aware of it. Yeah, good point.
I'm just going to interrupt here real quick, Bill.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this one was tabled with the city, so it got kind of messy. So that's probably why there's a lack of communication there. So, but what's the time frame for the annexation?
I think it's in the agenda item, but I think they were looking at next year.
Okay, that's what.
Or this year, excuse me. Now that we're in 2020. When the annexation occurs. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was in the fall.
Did it happen already?
No,
Coming up.
But yeah, I think that's why there was a lack of communication on it, because we didn't really vote on it when it was first presented. So, and then it was tabled. So yeah, so I can understand why there was a lack of communication. But yeah, it's up and going now. It's right off 75, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and generally, I mean, these agreements are a certain cents per kilowatt hour for a certain period of time, and then when it starts, of course, matters. Right now, we're paying the cooperative for a temporary service at the same rate, 31.3. The 10 years won't start until there's a permanent service installed, and that, Joe, I believe, is probably pretty quick.
I just had an electrician call me and they'd like to get that
ASAP.
yes.
But sometimes it does. The 10 years doesn't start until annexation happens. In this case, it'll start before that. So there's, we like to be as consistent as we can with these arrangements because they can get fairly contentious in the state of Minnesota. So.
Anything else? Okay.
So we're recommending approval.
Okay. Ready for a motion?
I'll make a motion to have it approved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Item number 11, approve task order number 2 with Apex Engineering Group. I think we have a handout for that. Is that-
Yeah, we have a revised one.
Revised, yep.
Chris can go through it, and then we can answer questions.
Yeah, this is kind of nice. John mentioned that Ralph Meter Midland was one of the champions of infrastructure in terms of water main replacement. And we've done a lot of water main replacement over the years, the last several years. This is kind of the first step towards 2020 water main replacement for Moorhead Public Service. Just to kind of highlight what we've done the past few years, between 2014 and 2017, we spent about $1.8 million per year to replace about in excess of 8,000 feet on average. So a lot of work that's been done to replace failure-prone cast iron water main. So water main that's been in the ground since, in a lot of cases, since the 1920s. We're working to replace that infrastructure, and we're not unique in that regard. Many communities throughout the country are facing this infrastructure need. We start the planning process for water main replacement usually in the summer of the prior year. So we were in discussion with city staff in July of this past year, have maintained discussion. Really what we try to focus on doing is conducting our projects at the same time period as planned mill and overlay or street rehabilitation projects. And we do that because we generate typically 20 to 30%, depending, 30% savings on the project cost if we can coordinate those respective projects. So we spend a lot of time and energy to coordinate those respective projects. And one of the pieces of the revised items is a paper that I submitted, or I co-authored last year, on kind of how we work with the city to cooperatively plan infrastructure improvements and how we generate cost savings in those respective efforts. So, and that was presented at a national conference. Regardless, we're looking at moving forward with 2020 projects. We submitted a request for qualifications to 4 firms locally. We had a 3-person MPS staff committee review those respective submittals. Because it was a request for qualifications, we just received qualifications with no pricing associated with that. And Apex was selected as the RFQ, successful RFQ consultant. And so we're looking at moving forward with the design of 4 projects. They're highlighted in Table 1 of your report. One of the kind of interesting pieces is that Project 1 is a project that we bid out to a contractor, but Projects 2 through 4 we're proposing to complete with MPS staff. So one of the unique things we do here is we actually perform a lot of the work ourselves, somewhat similar to what the street department does for street maintenance. We perform quite a bit of water main replacement ourselves in order to save cost. So we're looking at hoping to move forward with design on those respective projects, and that's our recommendation.
Question, John?
Yep. Yes, could you just get a little more detail here as far as when we received 4 other RFQs, but we didn't get any pricing attached with them, how would we know that we have a quote that is competitive with any other contractors?
Sure. We typically like to do what's called a request for proposals, RFP approach, when the scope is known. In this case, the scope was changing up until up until very recently. The city was moving around projects, deciding where they were going to do projects. So we didn't have a firm scope until very recently. So that's why we did an RFQ approach, and that's one of the downfalls of the RFQ approach is that you don't get pricing information associated with the proposal. It's a qualification-based analysis. So we look at the qualifications of the project manager, the quality of the submittal, their relative experience. But I could say that Apex has been fairly competitive on other proposals and feel that pricing is appropriate.
That's based on your experience with
That's
them in the past.
correct.
And would you go on a little bit further than Chris about Apex? As we had an issue with them on a past project here, could you just give some clarification about your comfort level with the new engineer that you're working with now?
Yeah, we've worked with Apex on several projects. The water tower was one of them. It's a different project manager for this respective project than the water tower. The water tower project's still ongoing with that respective project manager that you alluded to. I'm comfortable working with the Apex team on the project.
Okay. And then the final question as far as when we're looking at replacing existing lines, why do we need an engineer to put them back in from where they just came out of?
Sure. That's a good question. A lot of times, so a couple things. A lot of times we change the alignment of the water main, and we might move it depending on where it's going to be, and we want to, there's a lot of other utilities located in the right-of-way that we have to kind of plan for. So it's a planning level thing, and then it's also really the main thing is we have to do a couple statutory things. We have to submit the plans to the Minnesota Department of Health for them to approve. So we have to do a detailed plan set for them to approve those respective plans. And then we also have to do a utility coordination meeting where we show our water main replacement with respect to all the utilities that are also in the ground. So even though we put in the water main 40, 50 years ago, there weren't any other, probably not a lot of other utilities in the ground, but since that time there's been a lot of utilities put in place. So we have to, from a statute-based perspective, provide that information to other utility companies. So those are the two main reasons that we have to do plan drawings for these replacement efforts.
I have a question here. Is that okay?
Go ahead.
You said you had 4 companies respond with the RFQ.
Yep.
Is there any plan to just limit it down to 2? I mean, I've worked with RFPs. I used to be a proposal analyst. I mean, just follow up with an RFP with 2 of the companies that seem most qualified, or is that an option, or do you pretty much know, Chris?
I suppose we could have done that. So for the RFQ process, it's about a month-long process, and so we're timeline constrained because for example, project number 1, we're proposing to bid that project. In order to get that project bid, we need to have plans and specs by March, and so there's a timeliness factor to proceeding with the design soon. So, i.e., we don't have enough time, I would say, to further evaluate.
What was the delay? Was it with the city? You're working with the city on this one, or what was the delay on it?
Yes, we were working with the city, and so we don't really finalize what we propose to do until the city finalizes their plan.
Okay.
And they, I don't know the total development of their plan, but we were just recently provided the final list of projects that they were going to do. And I believe it's up for council approval at some meeting in January. I'm not sure which one. I assume the upcoming January meeting, but I'm not entirely clear.
Yeah, it's, you know, with RFQs too, it's fluid. I mean, if you don't have a set standard plans, for software, I mean, I've done RFPs for software, but I imagine it's the same thing for engineering too.
Yeah, and that was the difficulty because basically when we proposed during the RFQ process, I had a good idea as to what the city was planning on doing, but that changed basically from when I put the RFQ out to what we're actually doing. Probably 20% of it changed. The rest of it stayed the same. So if I'd have done an RFP, that fixed pricing would have been set to the scope that was previously defined.
Right, and it's changing.
And it's changed since that time.
Okay. Okay, that's all I know. Thanks.
Chris?
Go ahead, John.
I think Chuck makes a good point, though. If in a future projects, if it fits within a timeline, if you're going to look at an RFQ to determine who's the most qualified and then get the pricing, might be a consideration depending on timelines. So it's just a good point, and I think we should
I agree, and I think the city generally tries to get their scope defined a little earlier, and I think that's their intent. But they have a lot of analysis that goes into their planning process as well. So
and funding's a big part of it.
And funding's a big part. So it's not an easy thing for them to decide either. So, but yeah, it's certainly I appreciate that feedback.
Any other questions for Chris? I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second. So approving item number 11. We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Note the upcoming meeting of Moorhead Public Service Commission on January 21st. Hopefully by then we'll have a full complement, or at least we'll be in close communication to make sure that the three of us can make it. There are all a number of meetings listed. I'm not familiar with them, but if you have any questions, Bill, he can fill you in. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Oh, so moved.
All right.
I'll second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.